So, whistle-stop tour there of all the supports available from SCAI and some of the great successes that are now being recognised globally. Going to hand you over now to John Ryan. John. And John is going to chat to us about the governance and governance for sustainability. My apologies. How are you doing there?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
Okay.
If I can get the technology to work.
Right.
I think I've knocked everything off. Okay. Sorry. Apologies, Ron. I think Peter's description might move from the fact of, when you're from certification up here, the nice guard. I think I might have actually damaged that reputation straight away. And in fact, I was the nice guard who did the first audit up there for 399 up in AIPO many years ago. So very quickly, just as we're getting the slide deck up there, I'm conscious on the last speaker before the lunch break. So what I'm going to talk about very briefly is governance for sustainability. And my thoughts on that this morning, where we've heard a lot of different presentations in terms of specific examples of what companies are doing. We've heard about how standards and developments and our networks are changing, and lots of different pieces of the pie. And certainly over the last number of years, from our experiences dealing with the external advisory role, albeit in the context of management systems typically, we've seen that sustainability is now a topic area that is raised above the technical level and is flowing more at board levels in organisations. And I just want to touch on a couple of ideas in relation to that. So very quickly, governance for sustainability principles for boards. So very briefly, what is corporate governance? Well, I've taken this example or this definition and adapted it slightly from the famous Cadbury report and the OECD from 1999. And corporate governance can be simply described as the system or mechanism by which organisations are directed and controlled. And I suppose an important word within that is directed. And in overall terms, sustainability in some organisations can be seen as a cost, it can be seen as a compliance issue, or it can be seen as an opportunity. But my thought for today is that if it's going to be effective in delivering for an organisation, then it needs to be managed at the appropriate level within that organisation, the level at which the organisation itself is actually directed and controlled. So looking at corporate governance for sustainability is really how an organisation evaluates and directs their business and how it actually monitors progress against specific goals. And that includes things like the strategy, the policies and the systems within an organisation and the oversight of those. And so, for example, we've heard a number of presentations today about ISO 50001 for energy management. And the ISO series of business management system tools are really the management tools by which the overall vision and strategy of an organisation can be achieved. But what should a board of directors, for example, or those charged at that level in an organisation be doing to ensure that that actually happens? So very quickly, looking through the various principles then that would underpin a good governance strategy in an organisation. And I've simply taken these, and you can look at different variations thereof, but I've tried to adapt these slightly in relation to sustainability. And I'm going to go through these one in a little bit more detail, looking at responsibility, strategy, investment, performance, conformance, and human behaviour. And some of the other speakers have touched on various components of this over the course of the morning, and hopefully I'll try and bring these two together. So from a responsibility point of view, if an organisation was to say they adopt the principles of corporate governance for sustainability in dealing with their responsibilities, what might that look like? Well, the principle would say that the individuals or people within the organisation both understand and accept their responsibilities in respect of sustainability, so that they're aware. And that's really a role for a board or an organisation to evaluate what are the options for assigning sustainability responsibilities, and in looking at that and assigning those responsibilities, making sure that they're effective, that they're efficient, and there's an acceptable use of sustainability tools, techniques, methods and processes in line with the overall objectives of the business. And so the challenge here in some cases is aligning the business need versus the sustainability need, where the two may not always run hand in hand. And in looking at responsibility, there needs to be an evaluation of competence built into that process, and also who's going to be given authority for decisions, make decisions that are going to be made, and how then is the board going to be informed. that that is actually working. And that might be through specific metrics, or it might be through specific tools, or it might be through the achievement of certain types of certifications or standards, as we've heard about from earlier presenters. And also an important point within here is the level of authority. And within management systems, and certainly in the organisations that we've been involved in, this is something that always comes up in early days. Who's going to have the authority to put the plan in place? And so while assigning responsibility is important, you need to ensure in a business that whoever is responsible for the action has actually the authority to perform those actions. So, principle one. Second principle is strategy. And strategy is a term that's bandied about quite a lot, and it's raised its importance level. And they're saying that organisations need to have a defined strategy, and I suppose the vision and the culture to ensure that that strategy is live. But in evaluating developments in the sustainability of an organisation, and indeed its internal business processes, the board and the people at the top level directing the organisation need to make sure that they will actually provide support for future business needs. So this isn't just at a point in time, this is looking at the wider business. And so if an organisation says strategically its plan for sustainability is focusing on carbon, for example, or indeed carbon reduction, is that going to satisfy the ongoing needs of that business strategy? So if the organisation is looking to expand, will they be able to expand in line with their sustainability strategy of carbon reduction? And I think Peter gave a couple of examples on his slides there as to how AbbVie as an organisation are achieving a reduction in carbon, which I'm assuming is part of their overall business and corporate strategy, while at the same time maintaining and expanding their business, taking into account further developments. So that's an example of how the strategic plan for sustainability is aligned with the organisation's business strategy. Otherwise, there's going to be conflict between the two. However, what also needs to be built in there is objectives for changing circumstances, taking consideration of best practices, and the other stakeholder requirements of the business. And that's why unless that strategy is clear, is understood, and is future-proofing, it's not going to work from an overall governance point of view. Thirdly, looking at investment. So investments in sustainability should be made for valid reasons. That would seem like an obvious statement, but in a lot of organisations that's something that's managed at a management level as opposed to being managed by the board. So that should be on the basis of appropriate analysis with clear and transparent decision making. So what are the factors, what are the pros, the cons, what are the implications? What are the options, and what are the options that should be evaluated to look at those proposals, balancing risks and value for money of the proposed investments? What about the systems, the structure, the infrastructure, the assets to support sustainability? Acquisition of those in an appropriate manner is an important point as well. We've been talking to a lot of companies about that, and for those of you on the energy management journey, you'll know that energy management considerations as part of design and procurement is a requirement from an energy management point of view in line with ISO 50001. But in the wider sense as an investment strategy, what are the options available, and how should a board be allocating and making sure that the proportionality of their decision making is appropriate to balance the business needs and the sustainability needs of the business as well. And for every organisation, I suppose, life is about risk, and there needs to be an appropriate balance between the benefits, the opportunities, the costs and the risk, both in the short term and in the long term. And hence, when I talked about strategy, that's why it's important that that strategic vision for the business is understood. Otherwise, the principle of investing for sustainability is not going to be realisable if that longer-term vision is not clearly understood. And in most organisations, that's with the top management, or indeed the board of management, or indeed the board of directors. So having the responsibility, having a clarity, if you like, on the strategy, and also looking at the investment requirements, how is it going to work? And I suppose that moves us on to the fourth principle here about performance. And the means proposed by the management to ensure that sustainability is going to support the business processes with meeting the required capability and capacity of the business, that needs to be evaluated. It should take into account the normal operation of the business, and it should look at abnormal conditions that might have an impact. Risks need to be evaluated to continually operating the business in a sustainable manner versus the risk posed by the external environment. And how do the systems that are going to be used, are they going to be fit for purpose? How are you going to know that? The levels of service, internal and external, service quality to a business, are they going to be aligned with the current and future business needs? And so while it might seem simple to have principles in place, it's how the execution of those principles are operated are really where the value is going to be driven. And that sometimes provides the challenge for organisations. And as part of the wider corporate governance framework that organisations adopt or is fostered on them perhaps in some cases, that's what needs to be considered here. So looking at the conformance component of this, because I suppose the sustainability piece in an organisation can sometimes be driven by the need to meet internal and or external requirements. I've simply said mandatory legislation and regulations as a minimum here. And how does the sustainability function in the business satisfy the obligations, be they contractual, be they regulatory, be they common law if you like? You know, what about the internal policies, the standards, the professional guidelines? And a board applying these principles from a governance point of view should regularly evaluate their internal conformance to its system for governance of sustainability. So that is self-assessment, or that internal audit piece that Ivan referred to on his spider diagram, would be applicable in this context. And so a sustainability function must meet its minimum requirements, obviously, but the policies, the practices need to be clearly defined, implemented and enforced. And in a lot of cases, that's where the management system standards, for example, will come into play. And a number of organisations would simply say, well, look, you know, in terms of dealing with this, we're going to use the ISO series or alternatives or the emerging standards around design, for example, as our mechanism to ensure that we define, communicate and adopt systems and processes to make sure that this actually happens rather than just being theoretical. And finally, human behaviour. Because at every organisation, it's people that make it work while the processes are in place. So the policies, the practices, the decision-making have appropriate respect for their human behaviour, including the current need of the business, the capability of their organisation, and the needs of all of the people in the process. And so the capability of the organisation. It's pointless in an organisation saying we aspire to, to be the most sustainable organisation, we're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. But if you haven't got the capability in-house to actually deliver that. So this is balancing the needs of the organisation versus the responsibility versus the governance framework versus the capability. And I was interested listening to the terminology Ivan was using there in terms of the maturity model for energy management. Some of you may be familiar with capability and maturity models in other contexts, and this is really important. And an organisation can aspire to achieve a lot of different things, but if it hasn't got the internal capability, how is it going to make it happen? And it's difficult to achieve any plan or any project if you haven't got your resources lined up with this capability. And that responsibility is really part of a governance framework for a board in an organisation. So, very quickly and to end, sustainability in a lot of organisations, and maybe indeed for some of the companies here in this room, it may be something that's on your risk register. So something that's seen as a strategic risk or opportunity to the business if it's not managed correctly. And that's a document that some of you may be familiar with, or an approach that most organisations at board level will use to evaluate what they're going to do and when. And in terms of sustainability being part of that business framework, we're certainly seeing that it's being escalated up. Organisations being required to make decisions on investment. They need to look at that as part of their overall business planning. And I suppose the challenge that I would see for some organisations is that the capability to have that within their organisational control at this moment in time may not need to be there. And so there may be an opportunity or indeed a need for organisations to upskill themselves in this wider sustainability area from a governance point of view, or indeed perhaps even to add into it from a recruitment point of view, to bring in specialists at board level who can actually advise the corporations and the businesses, companies, whatever way you want to describe it, where sustainability is an area of risk and indeed opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Just opening the floor to questions, just to see. I've got quite a few for Ivan. As you can imagine, he covered a lot of ground, but I think all three of our speakers covered a lot of ground. Okay, I'll just throw a quick one to Peter first of all. You showed a great graph at the end there which showed the impact on CO2, but obviously it had a big impact on costs, which you said, but what did that have to, how was that perceived, if I can put that within the corporation? Was it seen as something that added to the security of the site on that location? Yeah, you want to grab your mics, gents? Sorry, just to, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose when you look within the corporation, I suppose it depends on the audience you're talking to. Obviously, the finance guys and girls on site are, more interested in the financial costs, and we make commitments within the energy management program on how much cost improvement, as we call it, we're going to deliver year on year, and we report those on a monthly basis, and they're verified. That's the software that would use by finance, and if we're not getting those, then questions are asked. But we also have targets for its CO2 reduction and kilowatt hours, but more on the corporate side from a CO2 reduction point of view. So we are actually being challenged at the moment to be more aggressive on that within corporate. So the journey goes on.
Very good.
So, but yeah, it is important. On site it's CO2 and cost, and then dependent finance are more interested in the cost, and then our corporate global energy team are interested in cost and CO2.
Great. So it's helping to secure the position in Sligo.
Absolutely, yeah. and I suppose you're always mindful of where you are relative to everybody else within the network. So
great. Good. Thank you. And Ivan, I've sent you on just a couple of questions.
I haven't got.
Right, you are. I'll read them back out to you. Just from Mike Fuller.
Thanks,
and the two questions, so I'll put them into one and you can respond to them both. But can you?
More than two, actually. There's one with 3 or 4 questions built into it.
There is, yeah.
You better read it all.
Will I read it all? I will. Can you please clarify, can companies continue to do an SI 426 energy audit and calculate the 4-year energy audit date, re-audit date, from the 5th of December 2015?
My understanding is that it'll be like an NCT on a car, that the NCT only lasts for the period from which it's due until the next period that it's due. So if you haven't done it before the 5th, then the next 4-year period kicks in whenever, then you will be required to do it at that stage. In other words, the 4 years won't roll on.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
so get it done.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second question was, can you also please confirm what actual date in June 2016 and what certification audit is required by that date? So that's this current year, June
I would
20.
say the 30th of June this year would be the date that it would need to be required. Just bear with me. Sorry, what was the next one?
What certification audit is required by that date?
It's quite detailed. It's laid out in Annex 6 of the directive. It should be based on up-to-date measured traceable operational data, detailed review of energy consumption profile of your building or facility. It should include life cycle cost estimates for evaluating the financial benefits, and it should be proportionate. In other words, you should look at your significant energy users, not necessarily dwell on benefits from smaller opportunities, and they should allow for detailed and validated calculations that if somebody else comes in the following year to reappraise your audits, then that they would be able to take on board the findings from previous audit that's done. I think that's about it, and it should be storable and a number of other ideas. But it's all in the directive, which you can search for online, which I've just done in anticipation.
Yeah, I think there's a staff guidance document out there for anyone who wants to understand what the actual directive means. You can read what the Commission meant.
Yeah, in addition, where you have an energy audit guide, it might be a little bit late now, seeing as the deadline was the 5th of December, but given that we feel that there's still a lot of non-compliance out there, I think it'll be of some benefit. And
Great.
Moving on from the directive as well, there are others that might utilise that document.
Very good. Now, I'll give you a chance to pause for breath, and just, because I have other questions for you, but I'll just come back to you in a second, Ivan. John, just a quick question for you. We're talking there about, obviously, risk, and what level of attention are you getting from the C-suite, the board level, in relation to risk and governance, in relation to sustainability?
Well, I think it depends on the organisation, but I think the overall sentiment is that this is something that in a lot of cases can be seen as a technical area, whereas from a a wider perspective, it's something now that needs to be included on the risk register. I think there's a level of uncertainty as to what that actually means, and sustainability itself is such a broad topic area that it can be down to the individual organisation. But I think the overall sentiment that we're getting is that this is something that a board needs to consider. It's not just simply pass the buck down to the management, and let them get on with it, because they wouldn't, in all cases, be attuned to the subtleties of the business plan 5 years out. And ultimately the responsibility comes back up to them.
Very good. Okay, that's great. And then there was one particular question I just wanted to give Ivan a chance to pause for breath, but I think it's quite an important question, so I'm going to just pose it. And it's basically, what are the consequences for companies that do not comply with Article 8?
Yeah, thanks. Hello? Yeah. It's a Class A fine in the District Court set at €5,000 per annum. SEAI will not have any role for ensuring compliance with the legislation.
Yeah, I think that there's a problem with that, Mike. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it will be solely the responsibility of the Department of Communications, Energy and Natural Resources to see that companies are compliant with it, so it would be up to them to...
so a distinct gap between the helpful stance of SCAI and the potential enforcement stance.
Yeah,
okay.
But it's a €5,000 fine, substantially less than in the UK, I have to say. So.
Okay, so just last chance for our questions to our speakers. Obviously, we're going to break for lunch now, so you'll get a good chance to buttonhole them if you wish, one-on-one. But what I would say to you is we're going to take a break now, and we're going to be back for around about 2 o'clock, 2:15. With a really strong lineup of speakers, really being able to get deep into the process and processes. So those of you who are interested in that area, and many of you will be from a pharmaceutical point of view, I suggest you do come back and come armed with your questions for our speakers. A very strong lineup of speakers there. And to respect our speakers who put the time and effort into putting this knowledge together for you, and the opportunity for you to ask them questions. It's not an opportunity you'll get in the normal course. But I think also to put a shout out for our exhibitors, do please interact with them. There are people out there with money to help you. There are people out there with funding. I saw solar power was there, first time I've seen it. If anyone's got a big roof they'd like to sublet, I think there's someone out there you can have a chat to. And there's quite a number of suppliers there helping you out in terms of energy efficiency. So please use the time as productively as you can. And I think we'd take a break there, ask you to show your appreciation for our 3 speakers, and we'll see you back just after 2. Thank you.